Well, welcome everyone. My name is Marc-André Pigeon. I'm the director for the Canadian Centre for Study of Co-operatives, and it's my great pleasure to be here today with Rob Wellstood. Rob, I'll just ask you, like I have everyone else, if you can just give me a couple words of introduction, who you are, where you
Sure.
are, and how you got to be where you are.
Very good. I'm Rob Wellstood, the CEO of Kawartha Credit Union, headquartered in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada. Kawartha is about a $2 billion credit union, 23 branches spread across Eastern Ontario, basically. Myself, an accountant by training. I started at Kawartha in 1993. And thought I'd be here for 5 years, whatever that is now, almost 30 years later. So I turned into a lifer. Was the controller for the first 10 years and have been CEO for the last 15 or so.
So Rob, I mean, what's interesting about your credit union? I mean, many things I'm sure, but from my perspective for this conversation is that you're in a kind of mostly rural kind of area of Ontario. How have you been kind of living this crisis in terms of your relationship with your members? And do you think that's any different, or are there anything different about that than maybe what people are experiencing urban-wise?
Yeah, I think so, Marc-Andre. For one thing, you're right. Our territory, our credit union services a lot of rural area and small urban. So Peterborough and Kingston, which would both be small urban centers. One of the consequences of that is we're actually pretty spread out, and so there's not the density that you get in larger centers. And I think we are feeling, and not just at the credit union, but for our communities, we are feeling very fortunate that really when we hear the statistics and so on. I mean, in Peterborough, we just had our first death last week. Regrettably, it was actually a Kawartha member, but that's very fortunate. If I were in the GTA, it would be a quite a different story.
And what are you doing for your members now, Rob? How is that relationship kind of evolved through this crisis?
Sure. So I would say, what we are doing is probably pretty similar to most others. Certainly have processed a lot of payment deferrals. I think something like 1,500 separate members out of a membership of 50,000 roughly. So it's not a small percentage. Been very busy with that. So, we've always been able to do that, but not on, we had to look at our policies and procedures, especially to really ramp that up, put resources so that we could do them on a timely basis and serve our members to the standard that we like. Even before we really got rolling with the payment deferrals, we created two emergency lines of credit, two products, one for consumers and one for small businesses. And the idea was a quick, simple application for a relatively small amount of money as a line of credit that would let them control how much they use. And the idea was to bridge some kind of interruption in cash flow. So if you've lost your job and you're waiting for a government program to start paying you, this would tide you through. And we have certainly approved some of those, although I think maybe partly because the media has talked so much about payment deferrals, our members are really contacting us to ask about that. And so the other thing, I guess those are the main ways that we're looking after our members. I think and as I said, I believe our competitors would be doing something similar, same thing. I think the difference that the credit union brings to the table is kind of how we go about doing that. There is I think by our nature, there is a more personal type of approach to it. I don't want to, it's a bit of a cliche to say credit unions know their members better. That may be true. I'm not convinced that just being a credit union automatically entitles you to say that. But I do think there is a, the member ownership is at the center of it. And so there is a strong desire to serve our members with excellence. And that's, I don't think that's unique to Kawartha, although it certainly is part of our DNA. And so, instead of things like automated voicemail messages for people to call in and initiate a payment deferral, they actually end up talking to a person. And that's the how that we do it. That is a more personal way. And ultimately, there are a lot of emotions right now in the membership. There's actually a lot of emotions in our employees as well, because they're afraid. But there's a lot of emotion in the membership. And if you're in an emotional state, talking to somebody and potentially somebody that makes a big difference, versus leaving a message on an answering type system or keying in your account number and that type of process. So I think we've had a little bit of feedback from our members that they just have, you get this sort of well of relief once you tell them, yes, I can help you with that, and this is what we can do. It's actually quite uplifting.
So that's really interesting, Rob, because before this crisis, I mean, there was a lot of thought about, or a lot of discussion in the credit unions, but in banking generally, about digital this, digital that, yeah. You do everything yourself, self-serve kind of banking, basically. Yeah. But in this moment of crisis, that relationship part of banking, which has always been important historically anyway, seems to come back to the fore. Do you think that's going to kind of carry over? Are people going to remember this when things start lifting a little bit, or are they going to just go back to not caring and just doing everything themselves online?
I think that I'm a believer. I'm part of the camp that says this industry is going to digital, and I believe that's what's going to happen. I think that is best primarily for transactional things. And when you have a problem, that's when you want to speak to somebody. And so we've come through the last month and a half has been a period of time that's been charged with a lot of individuals with problems. And so that's what's driven a lot of that personal connection and personal sort of interactions. I think the other thing, and again, kind of typical of credit unions, a little bit older membership than our competitors, who are a little bit more inclined towards the analog way of doing things. An interesting side note, though, having to get as many of our employees as possible, and largely in the back end, the support people, working remotely so that they're physically distant from their coworkers, has really kind of accelerated a digital transformation internally, not so much with the members, but internally. But it's also, even some of it is external. So, we're still doing business. And so you have a mortgage approval, you want to do a dispersal, there's documents that need to be signed. Nobody wants to come into an office and do that. Right. Neither the employees don't want that, the members don't want that. And so how are you going to suddenly put in place an electronic transfer of documents and signing? And, there's lots of technology that exists to do that, but you may actually need an application on your computer on both ends, and you got to be using the same. And so it gets a little bit complex in implementation and execution. So it's forced us to be a little bit innovative, and and certainly find ways. Again, with a fairly large territory and some of it rural, you have the challenges of lack of proper internet access, but also people that are traveling big distances and they maybe can't or don't want to. And so how do I get the, how do I get to the documents to someone who is housebound? And so we've had to confront that, and it's, you know, what we've kind of been saying internally is, you know, this necessity is the mother of invention. And so this situation has really created a motivation to do things digitally in some cases. So it's a little bit of both. It's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I think that, and now that you say that, it seems true to me, because you clearly want to do everything you can digitally, but at the same time, if you're struggling with something that you don't understand, or you just need to get some comfort that your credit union is there for you, having that conversation could be helpful.
I would say compassion and empathy are, you know, very necessary right now. That's what means a whole lot to, be it the borrower, the member who has a problem that we're trying to solve.
So Rob, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, because there's been also a lot of policy announcements with the federal government rolling out programs, one of which involves interest-free loans with a certain amount of debt forgiveness potentially. And I know from speaking to others and just reading the newspaper that their initial rollout of that was targeted at the banks. And how has that landed with you folks? I know that they've kind of prioritized people a bit. And have you found yourself on the good side or the bad side of that? And what are the consequences of what's going on?
We're kind of in the middle of that. So we are in the process right now of being onboarded with Export Development Canada to be an approved lender. We're about halfway through that process. Yeah, to your point, very frustrating, because as soon as that program was announced, of course, it's in the media, that creates interest. So members are showing up at our door, and one of the key features of that program is you go to your primary banker for the loan. You can't go get it somewhere else. And for those members, small business owners, that where we are their primary banker, they're coming to us. They're hearing it in the media, and we're going, well, we will figure this out. We will do all we can to help you, but we're not part of the program right now. So it was actually your former employer at Canadian Credit Union Association that really went to bat for credit unions across the country. I actually complimented Martha Durden on a call earlier today and said, you know, you moved heaven and earth to actually make this happen, because it was a lot of work. It was not easy. So good work there to get us access, but there's still a process. And, you know, not surprisingly, as with any government program, you know, it sounds great in the announcement, and then there's a ton of paperwork and I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed, and yeah. So we're halfway. We're in one of the early waves, not the earliest wave, but we'll get there.
So this is just, maybe I can get you to speak to one more thing then, Rob, and then I'll open it up for you if you have anything you want to add. The credit union sector is known for serving small businesses particularly well, right? They constantly come out ahead in these surveys. Do you have a sizable small business membership base, and I guess they're all watching this program roll out with bated breath, hoping that it lands. But especially in a rural part of the world where you may often be the only or one of the very few banking institutions. Maybe you can just talk a bit about that, your relationship as a more rural kind of community credit union.
Yeah, so you're right. We are the only financial institution in 6 small communities that we serve. So small branches, because they are small communities, but that's not insignificant. And again, in rural, there aren't big employers. If you don't work for the local municipality or Ontario Hydro, the OPP, you're probably either working for a small business or owning a small business. And so there's a lot of that type of activity in our territory. And so we do have a good share of it. I would say the history of Kawartha has been more on the consumer side. We were, years ago, an employer-based credit union, and so that's kind of stuck with us a little bit. But definitely, I think that aside from government programs, so yes, we are still working, and there is I've got about 200 small business members right now that are, very anxiously waiting for us to be able to say, yes, your money's on the way. But beyond that, again, in a rural area, we have a sizable lending book into the hospitality sector. And as you probably know, that the hotel business has just been killed by this. A lot of them are just closed because there isn't enough money to even make it worth staying open. So we were very quick there again to start issuing payment deferrals and going right out 6 months. So, so we've had 2 or 3 really nice, call them member testimonials. There was one that was sent to me, and the gist of it was, just you could just feel the relief in the way this email was written, and thank you so much. The owner had talked to a couple of their employees and said, you guys are the only one in town that's helping people. Now, I don't actually think that's true, but it sure felt nice in the moment. And it feels so nice to know that you've taken someone that had that kind of burden and actually given them some relief. So, yeah, I think that's probably about the best I can do on that question, Marc-André.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So Rob, I'll wrap it up and ask you if there's anything you'd like to add or something that maybe we should have talked about that we didn't.
Not a lot. I think it's very much in our mind. This is going to change a generation, maybe multiple generations, but my mother is in her 80s, sent me an email a couple of weeks ago, and she said, I was a depression baby, and that had a lasting impact on me. And she said, your father and I learned from that and probably drove you and your brothers crazy because we wouldn't spend money on certain things. And, as an aside, I don't recall being driven crazy, but it affected her. And her comment was, this is going to affect a generation, people who have grown up through a period of time of prosperity where they've never really wanted for a whole lot. And so we're talking internally about what is that, what is that impact going to be? I don't think it will be the same as the Great Depression necessarily. The world has changed since then, but there will be an impact. So will it be that nobody really wants to come into a branch? So do we stop shaking hands? I'm old school. That's the first thing I do when I meet somebody is stick my hand out. It's a reflex. And maybe that will become passe. I don't know, but so we're actually trying to think about that because I think that will affect the business. And you certainly want to set yourself up to be appealing to your clientele, your members, and the public. And so we want to at least be thinking about how is society going to change? What is it that we need to be doing differently to appeal to that changed society? And digital may be part of that too.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob, for your time today. I look forward to the opportunity to shake your hand because it's one of the things I remember most about you. It's funny enough, you have a wonderful handshake. So thank you again for your time today. Real pleasure talking to you.
Thanks very much, Marc-André. My pleasure.